everybody, welcome back to Arsenal Pass. Today we have a Levia deck tech. Levia is a pretty interesting hero. I think it's been a consistent underdog of Flesh and Blood. But to go along with that, I think it's also one of the most underrated heroes in Flesh and Blood. Hayden, I know you're a big fan, big proponent of Levia. Talk to me a little bit, about the hero.
Yeah, so I mean, Levia is something that we tested a lot during the last Road to Nationals season. It's something that we had in the locker. We didn't feel like it was quite the deck that we wanted to play, just for the way it played into a chain format. But we did think it was very strong, had a lot of good matchups, and has just a very natural, powerful game plan. And that's because Levia is all about these really efficient attacks. So you have a lot of cards that cost 1 for 7, for instance, or 2 for 6 with Go Again. But rather than, with our Brutes of old, where, Ryan and I are using your hand to fuel that, you're using a resource in your graveyard that allows you to play even bigger hands because you're not taxing your hand to play these really efficient attacks. So Levia is a deck that can have super explosive turns, can be really proactive, and also has like some really cool packages in it with the Banish Zone and being able to play from Banish. So that's kind of what Levia is all about. And I think it's going to be well positioned coming into the start of this new format as well.
All right, well, with that, let's go ahead and talk about the equipment.
Yeah, so we're playing 4 core pieces of equipment here. You've got your Carrion Husk and your Ebon Fold, as well as your Gambler's Gloves and Scabskin Leathers. I want to talk about the Scabskin Leathers first. I know Brennan's excited about Scabskin Leathers as always. This isn't a deck that's trying to sit back and just roll Scabskin Leathers willy-nilly. What Scabskin Leathers does best is that it can be a tool for you to utilize to help you out in tough situations. When your back is against the wall, Scabskin Leathers can really pull you back into the game by allowing you to generate basically nothing from a pretty average 5-card hand, which not many other decks can do. But it also defends 3, and then when you have good hands, you've got Go Again naturally in this deck. You don't need to use Scabskin Leathers. Sometimes it's free. Sometimes, maybe I'm putting pressure on my opponent. I'm coming in 4 and 5-card hands, and they're blocking out. And then all of a sudden I get to a 4 or 5-card hand. No Go Again. But I have this 4-card hand that if I had 2 action points, I could come in for 12 damage again. Perfect time to use Scabskin Leathers. The floor is really low and the ceiling is really high. So that's the strength of Scabskin Leathers, and that's how Gambler's Gloves pairs into it. We do play those. We're on average probably rolling the Scabskin Leathers 1 to 2 times in some games. Other games, it's really free to do so, and until you lose your Gambler's Gloves, it's actually often the right thing to do. On the other side of that, we have the Carrion Husk, super efficient, right? 6 defense, really good into mid-range and aggressive decks, especially anything that wants to go tall as well. And then the Ebon Fold is really important because it actually enables our game plan of triggering Levia's ability. Into the late game, we might miss on one hand because of variance. We do have a lot of cards that banish, but you could miss on a card that does banish. Ebon Fold is going to get you out of that situation. Plus, it can actually be an enabler for big hands by banishing something like a Howl from Beyond or a Deep-Rooted Evil, and then allowing you to effectively play a 6-card hand. So really important there. Talk about these options here, Brendan, as well. We've got Barkbone Strapping, which we're playing into the majority of slower matchups, control matchups. Really good against ice as well. To gain you those extra action points to pay for Frostbites. And then we've got the Skull Cap. You can play the Skull Cap or the Skullhorn depending on your meta. If you're expecting more wizards, I would recommend playing the Skullhorn. If you're expecting, more ninjas or more aggressive decks with on-hit effects, I would definitely play the Skull Cap. That's the only time, basically, we're playing it over Ebon Fold. And then, of course, we've got the Mandible Claws. This is a 1-weapon deck. You'll notice this is the No Club, Brendan. We have, no Hexagores, no Romping Clubs, no Medax. Although Medax is the one I would consider playing, again, if you're into a pretty heavy Wizard or OTK Viscera meta, because you do need a way to fill your graveyard initially, and generally that comes from blocking once or twice through the sort of early parts of the game. But if those decks aren't attacking you, you might need something like the Medax in order to help you fuel that. But otherwise, yeah, we've got the most explosive weapons with Mandible Claws, allow us to partner with Bloodrush Bellows, which is one of the strongest cards in the deck, as well as something like a Shadow Blasphemous or some of our other cards that do discard. So yeah, that's kind of what Levia is all about from a face value, and that's our equipment suite.
Awesome. Let's take a look at the core of the deck. All right, Hayden, now that we have the core deck out, let's talk about some of the packages you have here.
Yeah, sweet. So I've laid it out kind of in how the deck has small parcels within it. The biggest parcel by far, and you'll see, is what's happening here. And this is our 6 attack suite. So you'll notice it's a big chunk of what's happening here, including actually our resource 6 attacks, which we've pulled out to the side in our resources. Our 6 attacks, generally the rule of thumb. So this is our main deck, which is actually 53 cards. So we are always siding up to 60, of course. Never really more. We never want more in this deck. but we are, changing some of these ratios when we side. So in the main deck, we are playing a minimum of 34 6 attacks, and actually often we get up to 38, which is like a really critical number. But you want to be somewhere in between that 34 and 38, just as a kind of rule of thumb. So in terms of our 6 attacks we've got over here, we've got some of the classic ones you expect to see with like Beast Within, Mark of the Beast, Endless Maw, Boneyard Marauder. All very good for different reasons. And then you've got Command and Conquer, which is just, one of the best cards in the format right now. It's a 6 attack. It fits so well into Brute decks. Either, you're coming in with that on the offensive, and you're forcing 2 cards, or attacking that Arsenal slot and actually filling up your graveyard, which is really important with a lot of these 6 attacks. Same thing that you might see where, with Beast Within, we're discarding it, we're filling up our hand back up, we're filling up the grave with a 6 attack as well. So the whole time we're playing, we're trying to manage, our hand and arsenal, our graveyard, our banish, as well as our deck. So these 6 attacks are really important for that. Some of these also really help, move our game plan forward in the form of Endless Maw and Boneyard Marauder in particular. And that's Endless Maw, a one attack, a single attack, 3 cost that can come up for 9 is really important. We can't always be going wide, so sometimes we need to go tall, and Endless Maw does a really good job of doing that. We do also have, over here we have Shadow Blasphemous and Dread Screamer, and these 6 cards are like the kind of this is the engine of the deck in so many ways. I'll talk about Dread Screamer first because I think it's the easiest to talk about. We play 7 Dread Screamers in total, and that's to make sure that from a ratio standpoint we are drawing a Dread Screamer probably every second hand sort of thing. Dread Screamer allows so many of our plans to come together with us being able to go wide. Playing a Dread Screamer into possibly one of our cards from Banish. Or a Dread Screamer into another attack, or even a Dread Screamer into, a Claw at worst. So Dread Screamer is one of the things that's always going to help us, whether that be in the red version. We do have 1 yellow, and we do have 3 blues in our resources. And then the next one is Shadow Blasphemous. This is one of the best cards in Levia. And, to be honest, when this card was spoiled, we talked about it, I think, on Time in the Round when this card first was spoiled, about one of the cards we thought was really going to be strong in this format. And I still think it is. The card is, it's a tutor on a stick, which is huge, right? It's a 6 attack, so it, so relevant for our deck. You can go and find us one of our important toolbox pieces, which we'll speak to in a second, and also triggers a discard. So we can actually, off Art of War, off of Scabskin Leathers, enable our claws actually to go again off the back of this. So Shadow Blasphemous, I can't see any reason you'd ever not play this card into a Levia deck. It's one of the strongest cards you have access to. That's our 6 attack package, Brendan. Should we move through to maybe like the toolbox kind of aspect, which works, hand in hand with Shadow Blasphemous?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the toolbox aspect is kind of where like a lot of the deck's complexity comes in, right? Figuring out what to fetch off of Shadow Blasphemous, especially like a lot of this toolbox as well is after you play it, there's a recursive factor in Levia as well, as you go to banish it again and maybe throw it back in graveyard as well after you recur it.
Yeah, definitely. So you'll see we have 4 and actually 5, including this Deep Rooted Evil, toolbox cards, effectively. Cards that can be found off Shadow Blasphemous, and then to Brennan's point, can be recurred through our graveyard. We can go and find the Deep Rooted Evil, say, trigger our Levia, we play it on a turn, we get it into our graveyard, we play something like a Boneyard Marauder or a Hungering Slaughter Beast, we get this back into Banish, we get to play it again. And we can just recur a lot of these threats. So we'll just talk through, the threats that we do have. So we talked about Deep Rooted Evil. We do also have 2 on the sideboard. We're always playing minimum 1, but the card doesn't defend. So sometimes we need to cut back on those into especially decks where we do want to be defending more. The other card that I think is probably one of my favorites, to be honest, and one of the cards that I'm searching for a lot is Howl from Beyond. A non-attack action that allows us to have to, we can avoid the sort of go wide problem that you maybe have with action points sometimes and go tall, which is great. Pair that on a Command and Conquer, for instance, is really nice as well. We have the Ghostly Visit, really efficient 1-cost attack, so really helps us on our chains. Is great off like a Dread Screamer. One of the coolest things you can do is like recur this off a Dread Screamer. Always be presenting 10, 9, 7 damage. 8 damage, sorry. Good math there. We also have the Tome of Torment. So Tome of Torment's an interesting one. I've played anywhere from like 0 to 3 Tome of Torments. I think minimum you do want 1. I actually think maybe even you want 2. You do almost always in every matchup want to find a Tome of Torment. What it's going to allow you to do is to always be able to utilize extra actions off Scabskin Leathers if you are in a position where you are rolling Scabskin Leathers that's pretty low risk, or where you have really high upside, especially with the Tome of Torment. So we do play 1 just because it's not a 6 attack, it doesn't defend, it is a red, all these things it does. It is a big cost, but it's so powerful from Banish. And then the last one is Mutated Mass, which we actually play 3 of again in total, but only 1 in the main deck. Again, doesn't defend, so it does come at a bit of a cost. But this card is a great resource card that also has the ability to be like a really strong attack. And it's not uncommon to get this up to 6 damage on your big turns, where you're doing something like an Art of War, playing a Bloodrush Bellows, drawing through cards, and then eventually playing a Mutated Mass out of Banish. So yeah, that's our toolbox aspect, Brendan.
And what about the rest?
Yeah, so the next 6 kind of go hand in hand with our Shadow Blasphemous and Dread Screamer as like the engine of the deck. These are the yellow engine cards. And that's our Bloodrush Bellows, which we already talked about, how strong those are with Mandible Claw. If you've ever played into Rhinar, if you've played into Levia lists that utilize Claw, they'll be utilizing Bloodrush Bellow. Just one of the most powerful cards we can get to. And often it feels like the number of Bloodrush Bellows, Art of Wars, Red Dread Screamers, and Shadow Blasphemous you draw in a game can often sort of dictate how the game's going to go from a draw dependency standpoint. These cards are just the strongest 12 cards that we do have in the deck. So Art of War, of course, we can banish a 6 attack. That's going to trigger our Levia ability, allow us to draw back cards. And if we have a Deep Rooted Evil, we're also going to get a card into banish that we can play. And also it's just going to help us out with our action standpoint. Sometimes we have enough actions. We've got Dread Screamer turns. We might even be in a position to roll Scabskins pretty freely. Art of War is just going to allow us to get +1 onto our attack. So, a pretty versatile card in this deck.
And finally, let's hop over here to the resource cards.
Yeah, let's talk about the resources. Pretty tight resource package. I have messed around with some of these blues, but this is, I guess the most streamlined blue package I think we've had in this deck. It kind of starts at the top here. We've got Reckless Swing. We have 2 main deck, 1 on the sideboard. Just very strong defense reaction late game. That 2 damage is really important. We have so many 6 attacks. You're always very, very live to hit. We play another 6 attacks, 7 in total with the Soul Harvest. So 3 Wrecker Romp, 3 Deadwood Rumbler blue, and the Soul Harvest. This is one of the strengths of Levia actually, is that you get these 4 extra 6 attacks as a brute at blue, which is really strong for any of these effects here. Anything coming out of Graveyard, and of course our Bloodrush Bellows and Art of Wars as well. Soul Harvest you do play sometimes. To be honest, this functions best as a 3-block blue that has 6 attack. But there are situations where you pitch it early and the game does go long, especially maybe in like a Bravo matchup, goes sort of to the mid game. And then at those times, Soul Harvest comes back. You can actually filter out your graveyard with some of your worst cards that have Blood Debt or these recursive packages. And then you can actually set up for like a couple of big turns after that to finish the game. If you're not already doing so with 12 damage. And then lastly, we've got these 6 more enablers. Enablers are another kind of ratio that we really need to consider in this deck. You're doing a lot of things with like your 6 attacks where you want to have, I said earlier, like 34 to 38 6 attacks. We also want to have a high number of enablers. So in the deck, we actually have upwards of, I was just going to check here, we have 21 kind of enablers is like our standard. We're playing 20 to 22 enablers depending on the matchup generally. So about a third of the deck is enablers. And what I mean by enablers is ones that banish from your graveyard. So Dread Screamer, Unworldly Bellow obviously do that job pretty well at blue, but some of our reds do that a lot better. Hungering Slaughter Beast, Endless Maw, Boneyard Marauder. And then last but not least is Doomsday. Doomsday is, it's an interesting one. It's not to maybe the strength of something like we've seen with Eclipse and the chain decks of the previous format, but Doomsday still does have a really powerful effect in that it can help you chip in with the late game. So you make the token start coming in. You can banish a card from your hand to trigger Levia's ability, and then you can actually utilize your Scabskin Leathers if needed, if you're a bit on the back foot, but you have the token to start trying to find multiple ways to attack, push through damage off of a 2-3 card hand. So yeah, Doomsday has a good role there, and it's very easy to play out in the late game. You're always going to be able to trigger it. You don't have to really set it up, which is nice.
Awesome. All right, Hayden, let's talk about some key play patterns and interactions.
Yeah, so one of the most common in the early game is that you really want to fill up your graveyard. You want to get to like sort of 3 or 4 cards in your graveyard, ideally with 3 or 4 of those even being 6 attacks. And that's going to allow you to basically start the cog turning from there. There's this whole, I guess, thing about Levia where it's like, oh, you need to fill up your graveyard in order to really start going first. As soon as you start getting a few cards in there, especially with this list, you're going to just keep filling it up. Because you have things, like the Shadow Blasphemous that's going to draw and discard. We have some of these non-attack actions that are going to help draw cards and filter cards out and play them. We've got ways to recur some of our toolboxy threats as well. So as soon as we start getting a few cards in, we're going to keep that going. And as long as you can block with a card every few turns, if your opponent is trying to swing back for damage, you're going to find it easy to do so. You're always trying to play off 5-card hands a lot of the time. And that's because you have the ability to scab skin, or you have really strong hands with either like the Dread Screamers, the Blood Rush Bellows, the Art of Wars, or even an Endless Maw that's going to allow you to play off 5-card hands. And we actually have some cards on the sideboard for specifically more aggressive matchups, where doing that, playing these 5-card hands really gets utilized. So that's kind of probably the key patterns. One thing you might find early game is you're like blocker 2 cards come in with a 6 attack. So blocker 2 cards come in with a Command and Conquer. Blocker 2 cards come in with a Shadow Blast Effect. Another strength of Shadow Blast Effect is just the fact it helps you fill up your graveyard. That's so key. So yeah, those are kind of probably the most important game patterns that you'll find early on. But there's so many more. I would suggest just picking up the deck, playing some games. You'll notice like there's so many decisions around your recursion cards, how you play those, how you get them to graveyard, your sequencing as well. If you sequence a non-attack, and then remember that non-attack goes to the graveyard before you have so it closes the chain, right? So if I play a Tome of Torment, this is going to go to the grave before I even get the chance to do something else, like say, Hungering Slaughter Beast. So there's a lot of play patterns with, forcing those recursions through, or actually being careful about the fact that you might not have enough 6 attacks in your graveyard. But this deck, to be honest, has so many 6 attacks. Like I said, 36, 38, 6 attacks, never really going to be a problem.
Mm-hmm. And when it comes to managing that blood debt zone, your core game plans, how does that change in regards to the archetype you're facing? So versus, an aggro opponent, a mid-range opponent, and maybe a control.
Yeah, so it's pretty similar across the board for the most part. You are managing your blood debt by being aggressive, by actively using a lot of these cards to trigger it turn after turn, whether it be like Boneyard Marauders, Endless Maws, Hungry Slaughter Beasts, etc. Especially into aggressive decks, you just kind of, as soon as you get to a point where you can put the gas pedal down, you can still block with 1 or 2 cards because you have good ways to play 2-card hands and, for instance, come in with 9 or come in with 6 and banish and trigger. So that's pretty easy. I would say when you are up against decks who are actively trying to attack you and attack your blood debt, so they're trying to run you into turns, take the game long, run you into turns where maybe you can't banish to trigger Levia's ability, those are the ones where you do need to be a bit careful about how you maybe start the game. Once you get going, to be honest, you're still in the same game pattern. You just need to push through enough damage that their plan of trying to be defensive, try and be really efficient and push back on your blood debt kind of gets null and void. But where the sort of gameplay comes in is like the start of the game, where you actually, what I call like starting your blood debt clock, right? Which is as soon as you get your first card in with blood debt into banish, you're starting your blood debt clock. And against aggressive decks, it doesn't really matter when you start that. You can start that on turn 1. You're going to be triggering it most times. Against some of these mid-range decks, I might try and get to sort of like turn 2 or 3 beforehand. I might start stacking the bottom of my deck, getting some like Blood Rush Bellows and Art of War turns to the bottom of my deck, start crafting my graveyard a little bit with a couple of cards, maybe again with like a CNC, maybe a block with 2 cards. But at some point, you're going to have to start it. You're going to draw a card like Mark of the Beast, which is going to trigger it itself. Or you're just going to have to present an attack, present damage because they've taken a turn off, and that's going to require you to banish. So it's more about probably the way you navigate the first couple of turns, and what you pitch is more important than probably the active way that you manage the blood debt.
Awesome. All right, Hayden, let's talk kind of broadly about the sideboard here.
Let's do it.
All right, so here's the sideboard. Let's walk through kind of the idea behind the inclusion of these cards. Maybe not get into the specific matchups, but just take me through it.
Yeah, tell you what, where do you want to start, Brendan? I'll let you pick we've got a few different things laid out here. Where do you want to start?
So when do you play the 3 Deep-Rooted Evil versus the 1?
Yeah, okay, good question. We'll talk about this first. So Deep-Rooted Evil, where am I playing the 3 versus the 1? Into decks where I'm really reliant on probably like a recursion package and trying to get as much efficiency as possible out of the way that I'm playing my game plan, banishing, and then playing from banish. So mid-range, more on the control side of mid-range and control decks. So, Bravo, I'm bringing these in, which feels a bit weird because you say, they have like, really big attacks. But what you need to be doing is having an efficient deck, because if they see that you don't have these ways to take the game long, you don't have good pitches to go to the bottom, they can actually sort of ride you out to a degree. Although you do have a lot of big damage. If you burn through your Blood Rush Bellies, you burn through your Art of Wars, and you do it quite inefficiently, you can definitely be punished. So Deep-Rooted Evil allows us to play some hands more efficiently because we have, more things to play from banish, more things to recur. And having 5-6 card hands is, it's a great thing to have. So that's when we bring in the extra Deep-Rooted Evils.
I think the natural, where I want to go to this is, I know where Arg Smash is going. I have an idea, right. But Gravel and Growl, I feel like could be almost in the core of the deck. And we see 3 in the sideboard here.
Yeah. So Gravel and Growl some number of Gravel and Growl do come in a reasonable amount of matchups because it's it's like super efficient, right? It costs 1 for 7. It works so well with the Dread Screamers. This isn't a pattern we talked about before, but it's one of the best cards you can play with Dread Screamer. Come in for 6, come in for 7. That's a 13 3-card turn, right? 13 damage 3-card turn, which is perfect. When you're playing into, I guess, like more mid-range or control decks, like 13 damage for 3 cards is not really where you want to be, because you actually, what you want is like the best 5-card hands to push like 20, 24, 30 damage. That's where you really want to be. But what these Graveling Growls do really well, like we say, right, when you can present like 13 damage for 3 cards, that means you have the opportunity to block with a card for 3, or maybe one of these is from Arsenal, and you have the ability to block for 6 with your hand. And you're looking at 16 or 19 damage across the turn cycle. And that's really relevant when you're playing into aggressive decks who are either trying to race you or put on like on-hit effects such as like Katsu or maybe even like Lexi in the new format. So that's where Graveling Growl really shines. And in the previous format, one of the biggest sort of like game plans we had to play into Chain was actually these 6 cards. You'd bring in Graveling Growl, you'd bring in Unworldly Bellows, and you had like really explosive potential off of minimal cards. So you could play 3-card hands for 12, 13, 14 damage. But you could also then defend with 2 cards. So into the mid game, once Chain really starts going, you tend to start off faster than they do, but then in the mid game, it might even up a bit, and that's when you can be efficient and then try and find your end turn. So that was one of the biggest packages. But I still think this package is really relevant into a format we're moving into, where you're going to see like mid-range decks on the side of aggressive and aggressive decks. So yeah, and the Unworldly Bellows is very similar. We generally only bring them in as 3, but sometimes 1 sneaks in to help with our ratio of enablers of banish cards, which is really something that we look at. So these generally is a 6 together, but in some matchups, one might come in here, one might come in here to help us 6 attacks, things like that.
Awesome.
How? I'll talk about how and probably move into these defense reactions. How enables us along with Deeper Evil to have another card that can help our recursion package. It's not coming in every matchup because it costs 2 and it defends for 2. So against aggressive decks, that can be a real liability. But against the slower decks, it's a really powerful tool to have. Then we've got the defense reactions. So we played 2 Guardian, 2 Unmovable. We've actually played around with a lot of the defense reaction suite. Played none, played 6. Guardian of the Shadow Realm is really strong because we can continuously recur it. So it allows us to play like off 3, 4-card hands, pretty well, and still get a card to Arsenal if we need. You're not just continually bringing this back, but you are looking at like key turns where like a warrior sets up a 5-card hand, or the Bravo player is cycling back to the Crippling Crushers they pitched early, things like that. So that's where these are most relevant. And then the Unmovables kind of complement that to a degree. I've also played without these, and I think depending on what the format looks like, you could just do away with these entirely. But they do a fairly important job into warrior and Bravo.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what these are for, right?
I have an idea.
Arc Smash is for dash, of course. We play 2. It's going to depend, I think, on like how many you play between 0 and 3, depending on what the format ends up shaking out like. But the stick can play it pretty reasonably. They do pitch well, and you can obviously just smash some items with them. And then lastly, we do have the additional blues. So we are always bringing in basically every single matchup, we're bringing in one of these blues. Against the aggressive deck, that's going to be the Reckless Swing. Against the decks where we want to go up to 19 blue, that's going to be the Mutated Mass. So again, this fits in this package, right? Seeing a bit of a theme here where we can add an extra 5 cards into our deck, or actually even in some matchups, if it's something like a Bravo, we can add an extra 7 cards that allow us to be recurred from graveyard, which is we really bring up that recursion and toolbox package, which is pretty massive, especially combined with the Shadow Blast effect.
Awesome. So if you are interested in kind of a more detailed sideboard guide, fully written out what cards to bring in, what cards to take out, maybe in each and every matchup, as well as a detailed written guide on deck theory, ratios, all that good stuff, that is going to be hosted on the Arsenal Pass Patreon. So check it out if there's something you're interested in. And finally, Hayden, let's talk about it. How is Levia looking to fare in the Tales of Aria early constructed meta?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think it has a pretty good position in the meta. So you have one of the things I think we've said on the podcast and probably just talking to people as well, is that being proactive early in a meta is like a good place to be, right? And one of the things that Levia can do really well is be super proactive. It can also play into other proactive decks pretty well as well, because you can defend very efficiently, and you can also have these really explosive packages that come out of the sideboard, like the Graveling Growl and Unworldly Bellows. So I think at least early on, Levia looks like a good way to attack the format initially. What that looks like going forward will be interesting because Levia does use that graveyard, does have a lot of elements that you need to balance across your banish, across your hand. There's just a lot of resources that are, and that, like, Levia is a bit of a resource management deck, although it is an aggro deck in its essence. So I think, yeah, early on, I expect to see Levia do well. People playing into it. I think a lot of like early builds as well, you can punish because you have these super explosive turns that can just push big damage that players might not be able to come back from. But you can also slow down a little bit and play a bit more of a mid-range matchup. And I think if people are going to tend towards like these mid-range decks that are a little bit less efficient than you, then you're gonna blow them out of the water, which I think is a strong place to be.
Awesome. Well, sounds like exciting times to be Levia. Anyway, we hope you all enjoyed watching this video. Again, if you are looking for a deeper dive or more content on the Levia deck, that is going to be hosted on the Arsenal Pass Patreon. But until then, we'll see you all in the next video.
Bye, guys.